Hey guys, welcome to the 20th episode of Dental Business Pod. This is periodic live dental business webinar with industry experts brought to you by Sound Dental Partners. In these webinars, we share the key knowledge for all things dental business related while learning from the expert. My name is Dr. Jonathan Song. I'm a general dentist in Southern California. I currently own and operate 3 dental practices in LA and Orange County area. I'm in the process of making my own dental ecosystem, which is how Song Dental Partners started. And we plan to grow to 10 million total revenue with 5 private offices by 2026 without compromising ethics and clinical quality in Southern California. I only have 1 year left, so we'll see how that goes. Currently, we are in the process of acquiring our 4th location, which is super exciting, but we need good dentists who are willing to work with an ownership mentality. So if you think you might be interested in working with us and eventually become a partner with us, please reach out. And going back to the webinar, with the speaker's permission, the recordings will be available in our YouTube channel at youtube.com/@SongDentalPartners. We do not make any money out of this. We do this to help others who are on the same mission as I am, which is to grow and be better every day. And I only ask for one thing. Please share, subscribe, like, and comment so we can keep evolve this platform and provide more value to more people by bringing many more amazing guests like Cece today. Before we bring in our speaker today, I would like to go over some housekeeping rules. If you have any questions during the webinar, please type your questions in the chat so we make sure to cover that at the end. Speaker's contact info can be found at our YouTube channel episode. When you do contact the speaker, I kindly ask you to please let them know that you were at the webinar. And our topic today is hiring and firing with confidence, building and letting go of your team the right way. Hot topic. We have Cece Wilson here from CEDR HR Solutions, who is graciously offering her expertise and time tonight. Cece Wilson is Chief Operating Officer of CEDR HR Solutions. Cece has been with CEDR HR Solutions since 2021 and brings over 20 years of business, people management, and HR-related experience in private, nonprofit, and healthcare industries. With a focus on strengthening the desired workplace culture, Cece enjoys finding strategic, compassionate, and compliant solutions to business and HR needs. Cece is a SHRM certified human resources professional and has a master's degree in human resources management. Without a further ado, please welcome Cece.
Hello, everyone. So happy to be here tonight. Let me go ahead and share my screen here with you, and we'll dive right into the presentation today. So we're going to talk about hiring and firing. This is sort of like the building blocks of employing people, right? These are both ends of that spectrum of the employee life cycle, and it's something that as a business owner you'll have to do along that journey. So Dr. Song kindly already introduced me, so I will skip that part, but I will let you know a little bit about CEDR if you're not familiar with us. But we are an HR solution for private business owners, and we also work with your office managers for any HR-related issue. We provide custom employee handbooks for your office, along with that support. And the thing that makes CEDR unique and the value that we really offer is when Paul Edwards, our CEO and founder, started CEDR, it was based on the premise that small businesses, who are the backbone of our economy, really deserved the type of high-level HR and employment law expertise that your Apples and your Walmarts and your bigger businesses have, the resources to be able to staff on a full-time basis. And so he developed CEDR as a solution to that problem that, as small businesses, we don't always have the ability to have that on staff. And then we end up making mistakes or, finding pitfalls. And then that ends up costing us a lot more money in the long run. And so we take a proactive approach to help stop employment lawsuits from occurring in the first place. Whereas if you go to an attorney and ask for advice there, you might get a response that is more along the perspective of, can I defend this in court? And that's going to cost you a lot more. So that is the service that we provide. We're also experts in the dental industry, so we're able to combine the expertise of knowing what the law is with how does this actually play out in a dental practice, so that practical guidance. And so we're going to talk about that piece of it today. So we're going to go through sort of the basic steps of the hiring process and how to complete these things. And then we'll end today's webinar with talking about how to do terminations, which is never the fun part, but unfortunately necessary sometimes. So this is just your typical hiring process. Some of these steps are optional, and maybe you're not going to do them in every circumstance, but generally we post a job ad, we review those resumes, do the phone screen, brings people in for in-person interviews. We'll talk a little bit about what a skills test is, but we'll conduct some sort of assessment, right, on their actual abilities. You may want to do another interview after that. Once we decide on somebody, we're going to do a conditional offer, conduct a background check is the best practice, and then we're going to onboard that person. And so we're going to talk in more detail about each of these throughout the presentation. Okay, so we'll start with prepping for this, right? We can't post and hire if we haven't ourselves prepared for the hiring process. And so some of the things that we may want to ask ourselves before we get started, and this really does apply even if maybe I recently filled this role, I filled it before, I really want to think about where maybe what I was missing in the past, or if anything has changed, if it's been a while since I filled that role. So what is it that I actually need? What are the skills, both hard and soft, that I need this person to have? What are the difference maker traits? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I mean by that I'm looking for. What are some problems that I don't want to repeat that maybe I've seen, and I want to build in some questions because maybe I've gotten repeated problems. And then what makes other people in my office successful, whether it's the same role or it's maybe a soft skill that just makes people generally successful in my culture that I do want to duplicate. So back to that term, difference makers. So CEDR uses this term a lot. And a difference maker is just somebody who brings something new to our office, whether it's a skill set, knowledge, experience, or maybe just a really great attitude that's going to be infectious. What is the gap that I want to bring in that is going to make this person make a difference in the day-to-day in my office? And so we have a whole guide on difference maker assessment, but I gave you an example here of a self-assessment. And this is just a really great tool, especially as you're starting out, because we can't always hire somebody to fill every role, right? And so as we grow, we want to bring in somebody new to take some things off of our plate. And a really good way to assess what those things should be, what are the first things that I should give up, is to do this difference maker self-assessment. And so the way that we complete this is by putting the things that I'm really good at and I like doing in one box, the things that maybe I don't like very much, but I'm the one who should be doing them because I'm so good at them, in a different box. And then the things that I like to do, but maybe I'm not the most skilled at, go in a third box. And we want to keep a little of those things on our plate because they bring us joy, right? They make us want to get out of bed and do our work during the day. But there's maybe somebody more skilled at them, so we want to give some of that stuff away. And then the things that I'm really not great at, maybe I can do them sufficiently, but it doesn't come easily to me to get them done, and I don't like doing them. And that is the stuff that we want to hire for as we're able to start bringing new people on. And then we're going to do a position review, right? So if I'm not clear on what the role is, then my candidate can't be clear on what the role is either. And so it's really important to be really specific about what it is that I'm going to be asking this person to do. A lot of times, people use very different titles to mean the same exact thing, or they use the same title, but the duties are very different. And so we need to be really clear on, if I'm hiring a receptionist, there's some things that should be pretty obvious, but maybe there's some things that are unique in my office that I'm going to need this person to do. And so we want a good list of what those things are. For the entry pay range, it doesn't need to be a complicated grid that looks like something you're going to find in a larger corporation, but we should be clear on what the range is that we're looking to bring somebody into this role at, and more importantly, what can I actually afford, right? Because if somebody is going to come back and negotiate, I really need to know upfront what my limits are. Because once we're in the hiring process, it can be emotional, right? It's sort of like buying a house. There's a business component, but then there's also this emotional component because we spend so much time with someone. And so if we, for lack of a better phrase, fall in love with a candidate, I need to know what my bottom line is, how far can I actually go to be able to get that person on board. And then there's that other emotional component of, we don't want, right, we're in business to make a profit. And so sometimes we feel like someone's being unreasonable, but if I can't afford them and they're a great candidate, then I want to know that too, to make sure that I'm not saying, no, I'm not going to pay you that if I really can pay them that and get some value out of them. And then we need to know what the classification is. And I'm going to talk more specifically about what I mean by that next. So there's two ways to define classification. First is going to be whether or not they are exempt or non-exempt. And sort of the colloquial terms are they hourly or are they salary? But that is a small part of determining if someone's exempt or non-exempt. And something that you'll come across pretty commonly doing hiring is that people will have a preference, right? A lot of people want to be salary. And what they mean by that is exempt. They want to just be paid on a salary basis. They don't want to have to clock in and out. They don't want to have to do those things. And unfortunately, the IRS has, there's strict rules around who we can classify that way and who we can't. And some of the things that we're looking at are very black and white things. How much are we paying them? And then others are a little bit more subjective, but still pretty defined. And so that is what we refer to as a job duties test. So if somebody's job duties do not meet what the federal government says you can not pay someone overtime to do, then we can't pay them as an exempt person, regardless of whether or not that's their preference. And then the second sort of terminology that is used when we're talking about classification is independent contractors versus employees. And this is, again, somewhere where a lot of times your candidates might have a preference here. But again, you're really locked in by what the law says. And so the difference between an independent contractor and an employee is, the main one is, are they on my payroll or are they not? Am I paying them with a check from my bank account, or am I paying them from through my payroll process, right? Where I'm taking out taxes and I'm doing all of that. And there are more nuances to that. Are they subject to the handbook policies or not? Are they covered by my workers' compensation program or not? And then some things that also affect them, especially in a state like California, are they going to be eligible for those state benefit programs or not? And so, there's a lot of detail that goes into what they're eligible for, what they get. And so it's really important to classify people properly. Because if you are paying someone as an independent contractor when they should be an employee, you are going to be eligible, or I'm sorry, you're going to be liable for all of that stuff that they were not getting that they should have been, should this end up being discovered. And so this says updated as of March 2024, but there haven't been any significant updates to this information since then. But there's several points here that they're looking at to determine whether or not it's okay to call someone an independent contractor or not. The main one is really the extent to which the work that they're doing is integral to your business or not. And so context matters. So in my dental practice, the person who cleans my offices can be an independent contractor as long as they are also my employee. We do see a lot of times somebody will pay an employee to do cleaning or to do maybe a side job that isn't part of their main duties, pay them a different rate. And that's okay. But if they're an employee, all their work needs to be as an employee. But if I'm just hiring maybe a family member or somebody who provides cleaning services to other businesses, that person can be an independent contractor because the work that they're doing is outside of the scope of the services that I provide as part of my business. Now, if I'm a cleaning company, that's not true, right? So that's what I mean by context matters. So if I'm a cleaning company, a cleaning person is an employee. And so what we see a lot is, especially hygienists, they want to be classified as independent contractors. I don't fully my brain can't wrap around why they want that. I think it's because they feel like they can demand a higher hourly rate, which is true. Independent contractors typically do because they are responsible for their own payroll taxes and that sort of thing. However, they're missing out on a host of other benefits and then exposing you to a lot of liability if you're paying them that way. And a big one is workers' compensation. So if you're paying somebody that you shouldn't be as an independent contractor, and then they get injured while they're performing services for your business, you are at risk of being in hot water with your workers' compensation carrier, right? Because now they weren't supposed to be part of your coverage, but they really should have been classified as an employee. They got hurt. Now your workers' compensation company is involved when they're doing their investigation, and it's going to be a huge headache for you. So it's really important to get this right. That is probably one of the more common ways that this sort of error is discovered because people just get hurt on the job all the time, right? That's an unfortunate sort of fact of life that in the work that y'all are doing, that can happen. So why are we taking some time to talk about prepping for this? On average, filling a position takes about 40 days, costs $4,500. So this is a big investment for you, right? It takes a lot of your time. $4,500 is not direct costs, right? That's factoring in your time, your employees' time, all of that good stuff. So putting in the necessary effort though up front to make sure that you are getting your best chance at getting somebody who's going to stay so you're not having to repeat this process quickly is really worth it because of how much time in lost production while you're out somebody and in your own self taking your time to do this process. So a recap of some do's and don'ts. Really great to reflect on what your best employees have in common. Make sure that you're not making assumptions about, well, if I did it this way last time, or minimum wage was this when I did it last time. Just make sure that you're checking those details or seeking the advice of an HR expert to make sure that nothing has changed if it's been a while since you last hired. And then, think about who you want to be part of this process. and align your goals and expectations with them. So if I'm going to have my office manager be part of the hiring process, we should really be aligned on who it is that we're looking for, what our goals are. Do we need somebody tomorrow, or do we want to take our time to find the right person? And I'm going to tell you why you want to take your time to find the right person a little bit later. But make sure that you're having those conversations so that you're both asking the right questions. You're both looking for the same skill set or the same traits. And then another part of the prepping process is just thinking about, in my hiring process, are there things that I'm doing that aren't actually bringing value to the process, that aren't helping me make a good decision or aren't giving me good information? And then eliminate those things if that's happening. Don't forget to incorporate your core values into your process. They should be guiding not only what you're doing, but who you're looking for, right? You want somebody who is going to uphold those core values. And so they should be woven into your interview questions, into your process. You should be demonstrating those things to them while you're going through this process. So make sure that you're keeping that sort of at your forefront. And then don't wing it. Like we talked about, it's such a time-consuming and money sinking process. Make sure that you're investing a little bit of time up front to get your ducks in a row, so that once you're in front of people and you're engaging with them, you've got a guiding light guiding your actions. Okay, so we prepped. We're going to post the ad. The ad should entail a short overview description of what it is that you're looking for, the role you're trying to fill. It should include a description of your practice. Your core values for sure should be in there. What are some of the things that make your culture unique? We all have a unique culture, good, bad, otherwise. There's always something about our business that makes us a little bit different than the next person that they're going to be applying to. So we should highlight those things. Of course, what the primary duties are, what their knowledge and skills and all of that good stuff that they need to be bringing in. And then what's in it for them. And in our job ads at CEDR, we literally title that section, "What's in it for you?" And then we list all of the benefits, the time off, any perks that this person's going to get. Pay is an important one. In California, pay transparency is required at a certain threshold. We'll talk a little bit more about that next. And then an equal opportunity employment statement. So, that's just a legal little paragraph you can probably find on other people's job descriptions, something to sort of build yours off of. If you work with a company like CEDR or some other HR expert, they can give you that language. And then, of course, how to apply. So if you're using something like Indeed, there should be a button there to click. But if you want them to email something in or something like that, make sure you include those instructions. I've unfortunately seen a lot of job ads where it's like they just forgot that part. So, your job ad might be sitting there, you're getting no candidates. You're like, what's going on? And now you've wasted some extra time. So just keep your little checklist of all your things to make sure you don't forget certain parts. So cover letters, this has been a pretty big topic in HR circles the last year or so. There's huge communities talking about employers asking for cover letters are red flags. So they're being socialized to view these sorts of requests negatively. And so if you make that part of your requirement, you may not get great results from it. However, there's other ways to get the same information. One tactic that I use in certain roles is if we do a phone screen, like the person, think we might be inviting them to an in-person interview, then I'll let them know that in order to be eligible for that in-person interview, that I do need a cover letter for them. And that gets me much better results than just asking for it in the job ad. And then another tactic that we use sometimes is doing it as part of our skills test. where they can't use AI or some other tool, have someone else write it for them, right? Because they've got to do it there on site. If you're not going to have them do it there on site, you're going to let them, do it at some other part of the process. Use a prompt to get more value out of it. Ask them some sort of question. We've used sometimes, tell me about an accomplishment that you're most proud of, or something like that, to sort of get a feel for a personality, but also, can they follow directions? Can they answer those direct questions, and incorporate that into their cover letter? Okay, so back to pay transparency. I know this makes a lot of people cringe, and for good reason, right? We don't, as business people, we don't want to be locked into something because we don't know who's going to come through that door or who's going to apply to our job ad. And so this is a tough thing. In California, if you have 15 or more employees, it is required. And so a good perspective to keep here is that you are competing with all of the businesses who are required to post their pay. And so if you are not posting it because you're not required to, you're going to get potentially one of two things. You're going to either get the person who assumes that your pay is in line with whoever else they just applied to, and that may or may not be true. Or you're going to get the person who maybe doesn't care. They're desperate. They just want a job. And either way, you may not get as good results as posting some sort of range. So you don't have to say, I'm willing to pay between $20 and $28, right? You could say starting at, $20 an hour. So that gives you still wiggle room, but you're not going to get somebody whose expectations totally unrealistic with what it is that you're offering this way. And it is trending. So you can see 3 new states or pay transparency laws are going into effect this year. And that's in addition to the 11 that were already as of April 2024. So this is something that we're going to see more and more of. Which again just means more and more of the people that we're competing for candidates with are going to be posting their ranges. And so again, to recap with the do's and don'ts, keep your posting realistic, be transparent. I know a lot of times people don't want to put out, into the ether too many specifics about their culture. But we want somebody who goes, man, that sounds like a place I want to work, right? So the more that we can put in that job ad to attract the right people, the easier we're making this for ourselves. So sell your workplace. Talk about what makes it great. If you've got, we talk about in our job ads at CEDR, we are high feedback. So you can expect to get feedback on day 1 and day 100, right? That is just the way that we communicate. And so we talk about that because we want somebody who's really comfortable with getting feedback on a regular basis. And that might turn some people off, but that's good then, because that person's not going to apply, and they're not going to, or worst case scenario, they do apply. We miss that is a thing that's going to be a problem for them. And then we don't have a good fit, right? So be transparent, sell your culture. Of course, the legal stuff. Don't use language that excludes people based on protected class demographics. A big one that we see in dental offices, the front desk staff, right? You're most likely going to be hiring a woman, right? Because that's who's going to be applying. But you still can't use she in your job ads. That's going to get you in trouble, right? So just be really careful. A lot of times we're on autopilot, right? So we're assuming it's going to be women applying. And so we use that kind of language, and that really is going to get us in trouble. Using fancy, complicated titles. It used to be the advice to say, like, looking for a rock star front desk person, but that's not going to come up in an internet search. So just keep your title short and sweet. And then in your description of the job, you can use that different language. And there is data out there that shows that the longer the title, I think it was like if it was more than 4 words, you got like 25% less applicants. So you're going to get better results if you just use a title that's going to be familiar to somebody. And then what I mean here by the don't list something as required when it's actually preferred. So an example of that would be having a really rigid number of years of experience. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Statistics show that women are most likely to apply for a job if they meet 100% of the qualifications. Whereas men are more likely to apply for a job if they meet 50% or more of the qualifications. And like we just talked about, your candidates are mostly going to be women for most of your roles. So if you're having really rigid requirements that are actually preferences, you're going to exclude a lot of candidates because you're going to have a lot of women who are going to go, I don't meet 100% of those qualifications, so I shouldn't apply for this job. So be real focused about what is actually a requirement and go ahead and list those out because that's the people that you want. But if it's really something that you're willing to bend and wiggle on, you can say preferred instead of a requirement. Okay, so we posted our ad and now hopefully we've got candidates rolling in the door. And so we're going to look over their resumes. And what are some of the things we're going to look for? Of course, spelling and grammar. And I always say, if relevant for the role, it is likely that it's relevant for the vast majority of your roles. But this is a place where a lot of us sometimes have some bias. And so if it's not relevant to the role and it's not an actual barrier to our communication, then we don't have to be sticklers about it, right? But if they're going to be making notes, communicating with our patients, that sort of thing, and it really is relevant and important, then go ahead and be a stickler for that. And then what I mean by a resume that demonstrates consistency. So I'm not only talking about, longevity, that they're not a job hopper, that sort of thing, but I'm also looking at what kinds of jobs have they been doing. I've seen a lot of resumes where somebody is like a teacher and then they went into accounting and then they did this other thing. And that is usually indicative of somebody who doesn't know what the heck they actually want to do. And so they're just trying a bunch of stuff and seeing if something's going to stick. And I don't probably want that person, I want somebody who wants to do the work that I need done. And so if they're doing vastly different work and jumping around all over the place, then they're probably going to leave me to do something entirely different too. And they're not going to become a master at what it is that I need someone to do today. And then, of course, all the educational credentialing, all that good stuff. Using AI as a screening tool can be a huge time saver. Not saying don't do it, but understand that there is some risk here. Disparate impact. So that is a overly technical term that I will try to simplify. And what it means is I discriminated against somebody and I didn't mean to. So I used AI and it weeded out all candidates who were men because it assumed that I wanted a woman because all my current employees are women, right? And then, true discrimination, or intentional, I should say, discrimination. And then the biggest risk that I have seen when using AI tools is, because I try it, right? And then I go back through and say, did it actually weed out the people I would have weeded out? And a lot of times there are people in there who would have been great candidates that I wouldn't have seen if I hadn't gone back through and double checked what AI did for me. And that would be the biggest disservice to ourselves, is never actually seeing those people. Okay, so I highly recommend doing a phone screen. This is going to save you hours and hours and hours of in-person interviewing time. I also highly recommend scheduling those phone screens. And there are differing opinions on this, and I'm going to tell you, for me, the biggest reason why I'm a proponent of scheduling that time is if I cold call someone and they don't know who I am, they don't remember my job ad, or maybe there's a lot of noise in the background, or they're just totally unprepared, I'm not actually getting any value out of that information because I cold called them. Now, if I scheduled a call and they didn't know who I was, they didn't know who CEDR was, they hadn't taken a moment to refresh their memory about which job I'm calling about, or they've got friends over who are being loud, or they don't answer the phone when and they have to call me back. That is all valuable information that I just gained if we had a scheduled time. So that's the biggest reason why I'm a proponent of it. The other thing I want to say about phone screens is if you have somebody that you can trust to complete this process, that you're well aligned with, you can trust their judgment. After you've gotten some experience with this yourself, this is a good thing to farm out, right? Because the phone screen allows me to cast a wider net. I get to engage with more people. And before I bring people in to meet in person. And so if I'm able to ask my office manager or something like that to do this process, they can talk to many more people than I have time for, and certainly than I have time to meet individually with. So get some experience at it, and then train somebody, coach somebody to maybe take this part of the process over for you eventually. And then, of course, you want to go over the basics of not only their skills, but are they available when you need them to be available? What are their pay expectations? Is it in line with what I'm willing to pay? Make sure that you take notes, you're documenting each of these conversations. Make sure you're giving them an expectation of what your process looks like, what the timeline looks like. And that is a great way to head off people reaching out to you to follow up to see, are you still hiring? Did you already eliminate me? Should I be expecting a phone call? And then that's also another way to get good, valuable information, right? If I say, I'm going to get back to you with a decision as to whether or not we're going to move forward by the end of next week, and they call me in 2 days and are pressuring me to know if they're moving forward or not, then that's good information for me to have. They didn't listen to my instructions, they didn't write it down, that sort of thing. So share what your process looks like, share what your timeline is of when they should expect to hear back. I always give them a longer time frame than I expect so that I make sure that I'm meeting that expectation. And then send some sort of follow-up communication after, including if you're not moving forward. Can be short and sweet. Thanks so much for your time on the phone. We're not going to move you forward in the process. But that way they get some closure. You don't have to have them reaching out to the people answering your phones and bugging them. These are just some of the questions that I like to ask in a phone screen. People hate the why'd you leave your last job, or why are you looking to leave your current job question. Again, social media, they're being socialized that that's invasive. So what brings you to the job market? It's a little less pointed of a question, but gives you the same information. Of course, tell me about your experience, the pay range, that sort of thing. One that I like, because it helps me weed out the people who are just like, I just want a job, I don't care, is what are you looking for in your next role, or what are some of your priority considerations when you're looking for a new job or an employer? That helps me determine somebody who is also looking for a good fit and isn't just looking for a paycheck. And yeah, the rest are pretty standard questions there. So moving on to the actual in-person interview, you know, a great way to set somebody up to shine on during their interview and not have all that anxiety is giving them some good instructions about where are they going when they get there. If there's any sort of special parking instructions, who are they going to meet with? Let them know if you want them to carve out that time to do a skills test or something after you have a conversation with them. And then anything else that's relevant or unique to your business. At CEDR, our building's pretty weird. So I give them instructions about like, you're going to take these stairs and you're going to go up to this floor and then go in this suite. You know, if our accessible ramp isn't in a not obvious place. So if you need to use the accessible ramp, go this way. It's just a courtesy, and it's something that you can have, you know, typed out. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and then just copy and paste it in there, right? Make sure that, you know, people are prepped for their arrival so they know what to do with them when they show up. We will talk more about behavioral interview questions next, but make sure you're taking notes during all of your interviews. And then just like in the job ad, share information about what makes this role different than another role, what makes your workplace different than other workplaces. And then again, same as the phone screen, right? Provide a timeline for when they can expect to hear back from you or receive some follow-up communication. And then throughout this process, I do want you to remember that the best candidates really do have options, and they're interviewing you too. And so that certainly doesn't mean that we don't hold any power in this process, but it does mean that we should be thoughtful about giving them a good experience, giving them a good understanding about what it would be like to work for us. And then even for the people that you don't select and do not end up hiring, the last thing that you want is to give them a bad experience and have them influence other people to not apply for your jobs in the future. So, you know, to help support having a good reputation out there, because people do talk. Okay, so the behavioral interview. This is really the best way to understand how a candidate would perform in the future based on getting information about what they've done in past situations. So behavioral interview questions are questions that allow a candidate to illustrate how they actually performed in specific scenarios versus hypothetical questions. So you're using those real life scenarios to understand their personality, their work ethic, their skill set, their judgment. Behavioral interview questions can't be answered with just a simple yes or no. It requires them to give you more information than that. And then it also demonstrates their ability to walk you through a situation or a process that you might be unfamiliar with. So if that's relevant to the role, then you're going to get a really good understanding of, do they make assumptions and use jargon, or are they able to sort of explain to you something that you might be unfamiliar with? Are they condescending in their explanation? That sort of thing. And that would be an indicator of how they would end up speaking to one of your patients, right? If they were in a similar situation. So an example of a non-behavioral interview question would be, what's your greatest weakness? And if you ask that question, what you're going to get is the Google search answer, or what their friends told them interviewers want to hear. You know, I'm too dedicated to my job. That's my biggest weakness. You're going to get something that's not genuine. But if you ask instead, tell me about a time that you made a mistake at work, that is going to tell you all kinds of things. Whether or not they can admit to making a mistake, do they take accountability, or in their explanation of this mistake that they made, are they blaming someone else or circumstances or something like that? And then did they learn anything from that mistake? Were they able to carry that forward and make a change in maybe their process, their behavior, or just their own personal understanding of what happened? And some more examples of behavioral interview questions. These are some that I would ask of just about any candidate, even if the ideal response might differ depending on the role I'm trying to fill. These are questions I could ask of somebody very entry level up to a manager, right? So an example is how do you tell me about a time that you experienced interpersonal conflict that didn't go well? I always specify, I want one that didn't go well. And what would you do differently if you could go back and do it again? And so what I'm looking for there, again, is do they take ownership for their role in the conflict, or are they just going to use this as an opportunity to badmouth somebody? My boss did X, Y, and Z, and it sucked, versus I had this miscommunication with my boss. Here was my part in it. Here's how they reacted. And then did they self-reflect later, or can they now, at least in the moment, on what they could change that might produce a better outcome in the past or moving forward? And then I'll also talk a little bit more about that last one. Tell me about a time you identified a need for change or an improvement in a process. What approach did you take? What was the outcome? So an example of what I'm looking for there is whether they're solution or efficiency focused, or are they the type of person who's just going to follow a written procedure to the letter and not think about the system that process is part of? And maybe I do just want somebody who's a worker bee, and that's okay. But for other positions, I'm really needing somebody who is going to think critically about what they're doing, and they're going to look for ways to add value and make things run smoother. And if that's the type of person that I'm looking for, I want to know, are they just going to implement those changes, or are they going to collaborate with other people and make sure that whatever change they make doesn't have a negative butterfly effect that impacts other things in a problematic way? So I want to hear about how they've approached those situations in the past. And then if they reflected on, now, how did that work out? And if they can answer what that outcome was. Okay, this is a podcast episode that Paul and I recorded on quirky interview questions. So think if I gave you an elephant, what would you do with it type of questions. And so if you're more interested in hearing more about this topic, then I encourage you to scan that QR code and listen to that conversation. But I'll recap and say that those types of questions are low value. They really play more to our personal biases than anything else. And additionally, and I apologize because this is off of memory, so I don't have the source to cite available right now, but a study came out right before we recorded this episode that revealed that these types of questions turn off high performers. So it's sort of a double whammy of I'm not getting good information about how this person would actually do the job I'm looking to fill. And then I might be souring the people who could do the job really well. So I encourage you to check that out if you're interested in this part of this topic. So let's talk a little bit about working interviews versus skills tests, and I'll give a brief introduction to what each is. A working interview is actually completing the real work performed in the role to test their ability to do it. So having them actually treat a patient, having them answer live, real phone calls coming into your office, even doing filing, real filing, that is a working interview. Versus a skills test, which is a test where we simulate the work performed to see what their skill set is. So having them set up an empty operatory, taking a simulated phone call, At CEDR, we actually use a recording, have them take notes and tell us what they think is relevant from that recorded message. But you could role play to a phone call, or using an anonymized past patient chart and seeing if they can determine the treatment protocol there. And so the sort of boiled down test between these two is, can their work be used for the benefit of the practice, or is it truly just a test? And so if it's benefiting the practice, then that's a working interview. If it's just testing their skills, it's a skills test. And so some of the issues with doing a working interview is you really do need to pay them as employee, because like we talked about before, if they're doing something that is integral to the services that you provide, you've got to pay them as an employee, even if it's just an hour or two. And that means all that standard stuff, doing an I-9, HIPAA training, workers' compensation stuff, because you are on the hook if they, even if they're just doing a working interview, if they violate HIPAA, they're injured, that sort of thing, you're going to be liable for that. So to recap on the screening do's and don'ts, be consistent. Ask the same standard questions of all of your candidates. So that doesn't mean that you can't also ask follow-ups or tailored questions based on the information that you're getting in that in-person interview. It also doesn't mean that you can't skip questions if the interview is going really horribly. But what you want at the end of the interview is to be able to compare, right? If I've got two great people, I want to make sure that I've asked them all, these 5 core questions, and I can compare those answers for red flags, and to look and see, did I like that person because of something that isn't actually relevant to the job? So that's my second thing, is acknowledge those personal biases. We all have them. I have them, you have them. It's human and it's okay to have them. But the more aware we are of them, the less likely we'll make a hiring decision based on them when that decision's not in our best interest. So it's human to want to work with people we want to work with, right? So I'm not encouraging you to hire people that you're going to be miserable working with. But I am encouraging you to just be aware of where maybe something that isn't related to the job is influencing us liking one person over another one who might actually be better suited to do the work that we're looking for. And then, of course, like I've talked about, make sure you're communicating a timeline, adhering to it, building that good reputation up, so that people are saying, yeah, I had a good experience interviewing there, versus, oh gosh, I wouldn't apply there. And then, skills test over working interview is what we would encourage. And the don'ts, like we talked about, don't cold call people. The scheduling is going to get you much better information for that phone screening. Don't ask legally risky questions. So notice I didn't say illegal questions. A myth out there is that it's illegal to ask questions like if someone's married or has kids. It's not actually illegal to ask that or to have that information. What is illegal is to use it to inform your hiring decisions. So it's best not to ask the questions, because it would be really difficult to prove that you weren't using that information if you're specifically asking for it. But if somebody just talks about their kids or about their spouse or something like that, that's not actually a problem for you. Sometimes we think we just got information that's really bad for us to have, and it changes the tone during the interview, but it's actually okay. As long as we're not specifically seeking it out. And then, like we talked about, lots of risks with the working interview. So I would put that in the don't category. All right, so on to candidate selection. So once we've chosen somebody, we want to hire them, we're going to make a conditional job offer, and we're going to put that in writing in a letter, right? And we're going to include all this information so that both on the same page and we're really clear about what's your title, what's the pay that I'm offering you, am I going to be paying you as exempt or non-exempt? Are you full-time, part-time? That's what I mean by FTE status. Are you eligible for benefits? And what does that look like? When do you become eligible? If there's any bonus or other incentive pay details or eligibility, make sure to put that in there. Who is their supervisor? Who are they going to be reporting to? That will help you later. If you've got an office manager or somebody who is not actually their direct manager, that will help you to have it on paper here if there was some sort of claim that involved that person. Of course, what their schedule is, and then any conditions. So an example of that would be the offer is conditioned on signing the employee handbook, on proving you are eligible to work in the United States per the requirements of the I-9, those sort of conditions. Your ability to do the job would be a condition of employment, that sort of thing. And then of course your at-will disclaimer. And so that is a pretty standard language of, all employees of this practice are at will. And then of course their start date. So the background check. So if you perform background checks, and I highly suggest that you do for all roles, this would again fall under the conditions of employment. So this job offer is contingent on you passing a background check, successfully passing a background check. And these are going to be the things that you're going to be looking for in the background check. So notice it says criminal convictions. So arrest shouldn't be considered a disqualifier for a few reasons. Mainly, they may have been cleared after that arrest and never convicted for anything. And then for some roles, you may want to check credit status. So if you're going to be hiring an office manager who has access to your books, is able to, pay bills and, can write checks, that sort of thing, I would highly recommend that you're doing a credit status as part of your background check. Some best practices with background checks: make sure you're using a reputable provider. And you should be doing this after that conditional offer is made, right? So it shouldn't be that you're running it to choose between two people. It should be, I selected somebody, I want to hire them, and now this is just one other thing that I'm going to check on before they actually start working for me. And then, there are some requirements in accordance with the Fair Credit Reporting Act that you need to make sure that you're following, and that includes a disclosure about the background check and getting their authorization to perform the background check. And if you're using a reputable company, they will provide all of that for you, so you don't have to go research, what the language is that you have to provide and the timelines and all of that. If the background check isn't clear, they will walk you through all of that. And then another reason to use a reputable company, doing an internet search or social media search is going to give you access to information that you should not and cannot use without potential liability. And the other thing is, if you're not doing this search based on a social security number or other unique identifier, then you may not even be looking at the right person's info. It can be really difficult to discern. So if you're just using a reputable provider to do this, then you can be sure of what those results are and make a good decision based on that. And then be consistent. And what I mean by that is I'd recommend you do them for all roles, but at the very least, if you do it for this time when you're hiring an office manager, you should be doing it every time you hire an office manager, right? Every time there's turnover there, be consistent with that. And then to recap the selection do's and don'ts, of course, like we talked about, reflect on our personal biases. be realistic with our expectations, right? We're not going to find the perfect person, but we can find a pretty darn great person if we are in line with our core values and we really stick to the process. And then in the don'ts, as long as we're doing the do of being realistic, don't settle. This is your livelihood, right? And so even if you have to take a little bit of extra time, go ahead and keep looking for the right person versus settling for just somebody who will do the job, but maybe not great, maybe cost you some headaches, maybe cost you some team morale. And that makes it easier when we do make a mistake, even though our efforts were in good faith, makes it easier to swallow if we can say we really did do our best. And we can't always predict the future and we can't control that other person. So, but always try not to settle, even if it takes you a little bit of extra time. Okay, the final part of this hiring process is going to be onboarding. So on their first day, again, sort of similar to the instructions about the interview details, this can really help settle that first day anxiety so that they can shine and show up as their best self for you when they get there on their first day. So let them know, when of course they're expected to arrive, if there's something they need to bring with them, of course, what they're expected to wear, what is your dress code, what, if you're going to issue uniforms to them or something that first day, let them know that and how they should show up. Who they should ask for, who will be greeting them. And some of those little details really go a long way to helping people just feel like, okay, they're going to be expecting me. I am comfortable. They care, and it can be really impactful and meaningful to that person. And then, of course, all that standard stuff you're going to want to collect, right? An I-9, W-4, that's the federal tax form. Emergency contact, if you've got state-specific tax forms, like Texas doesn't, but for most states, there is a state-specific form. Their personal information, and then any other state-required forms. And then resources you're going to want to give them on their first day. An overview of their training schedule, and it doesn't have to be super detailed, but I do recommend giving them something, right? Here is what the training process looks like. Here's how long I expect it to take. I expect you to be functional and sort of on your own 2 feet by this date. Some sort of expectations around what that training looks like for them. Of course, any sort of logins and passwords that they would need. Definitely have a job description. This is going to be very protective for you if things do not go the right way, if they're failing to meet your expectations, or if you end up in a situation where they need some sort of accommodation based on a disability or something like that. You really need a solid job description to lean on to protect you in all of those scenarios. Of course, an employee handbook. They should get that on day one, and they should have access to it always. It's a great foundational item, not only an intro into your culture and what your core values are and that sort of thing, but there are a lot of legally protective policies and resources that you would have in there if you had a legally compliant employee handbook. And then, of course, an intro into who you are as your business, right? Your mission, your vision, core values, your org chart, that sort of thing. Make sure that they're aware of who their partner or their mentor is. If they have questions or need some direction, they find themselves with downtime, who are they supposed to go to? Sometimes people will sit idle just because they don't know who they should ask. They don't want to bug the doctor, or they don't know, if their coworker over there is the right person. And so some people will freeze up and ask nothing instead. And, you don't want someone sitting around being unproductive because of something like that. So let them know who their go-to is there. Make sure you're doing HIPAA training for them. If you use CEDR, we've got the HIPAA training modules that are designed for your onboarding, so they get that upfront training. And I'm sure that there are other services out there that can offer that, but very important to get them HIPAA trained right away. And then, of course, any state required notices. So in California, there's a specific wage notice, for example, that you must provide at hire, sexual harassment training, whole host of state specific things that you need to make sure that you're doing as part of that onboarding. So the do's and don'ts for this section, really the biggest do is making sure to give them time to knock this stuff out. I know that it can be difficult to prioritize it because we wouldn't be hiring if we didn't need them. We're anxious to get them started right away, but taking care of this foundational housekeeping stuff is not only beneficial to them so that they're not splitting their focus, but it's beneficial to us because it makes it easier for us to make sure we got that through that whole checklist of stuff and we didn't miss something that might come back and create a problem for us later. I've seen people, who never had their employees sign the handbook because they didn't make it part of like a day one agenda of items. And so then the person got it, they looked at it, but the actual signing of it did not get checked off. And now how much good did it do you to have that handbook and have them read it? None, because you can't prove that they did. So I really do encourage you to set aside that time specifically for them to do all this stuff before you ramp them up and get them going. And then make sure to set aside some time to check in with them at the end of that day one of doing all of this paperworky transactional stuff, right? So we're reintroducing that human connection and letting them know what to expect for tomorrow. That's a great way to send them home from their first day, to get some engagement and get them bought into your culture. And so on the don't side, don't forget to check in with them. It can be really lonely to be sat at a desk and asked to just do all this checklisty stuff. So, taking a couple minutes to say, how are you doing? You got any questions? Are you stuck on anything? Are you good? Can make a big impact. And don't skip this opportunity to set expectations with them. Make sure that you get them set up for success. A successful new hire is hard earned, right? We have to put in a lot of effort to get somebody good on our teams, and we want to keep them. So make sure that we get, starting on day one off on the right foot. Okay, we're going to jump into terminations. Not the most fun thing that we'll have to do as employers, but a necessary part of having employees. So when we come to a point in their journey that we've got to make a decision to terminate or not, these are just some of the things that we should be considering. How severe is this issue? Right? And maybe it's not severe, but maybe it's repeated. So that's how we're evaluating. Is this the end of the road, or is it something I should continue to coach on? And we should review what our documentation has been. If I haven't been documenting all those times I talked to somebody about being late, then I don't have as much legal standing if they come back and say I fired them for a different reason. But if I have a solid documentation that I spoke to them on this date and then on this date, and here's what we talked about, and here's what we tried, then really, if they try to say that this is because yesterday I learned they're pregnant, that's going to be a much easier battle for me to fight. And so then the next part of that is weighing our risks, right? If this is the only male on my team of 10 females at the front desk, there's probably more risk there than if this person's demographics are in line with the rest of my team. And that doesn't mean that there is immediate risk because of that, but it's a factor that I want to at least be aware of, to make sure that if all of my other checklist items here are good to go, that's going to be a much less problematic piece of it. But if I've got some holes here and then I've got a hole here, now maybe that demographic issue becomes a bigger concern. And then, of course, before I decide whether or not I'm going to fire somebody, I always want to consider what the impact is going to be to the team and the workload. And, oftentimes that impact is going to be positive because this person has been creating problems. Maybe it's morale problems. Maybe the team is having to pick up their slack. And so maybe they're going to look at this favorably. But it's something that I should definitely consider is what's going to happen to the rest of my team if I make this decision. And so again, those risk factors, if I don't have good documentation, if they just came to me and told me that they're pregnant, or they just came to me and said, I need an accommodation for this medical issue that I'm going through, that sort of timing and protected stuff is going to complicate things. And so now my documentation becomes even more important. And so, that's why we always want to document as we're going forward, because we never know until we get there in hindsight, how important that's going to be. Because anything could crop up tomorrow that makes that 10 times more important. So some common myths around firing. At-will employment means I can fire anyone, anytime, for any reason without any risk. That last part of it is what makes this untrue. I can fire anyone at any time, and the caveat there is for any legal reason. But even if it's a legal reason, it doesn't mean that it's without risk, because anybody can tell any story they want to. And so if I don't have great documentation, now it becomes he said, she said, and it becomes a little bit of a battle. Unemployment eligibility is a common myth around terminations. A lot of people think that if you fire somebody, they're automatically eligible for unemployment, and that is not true. Many states, if you're able to show your documentation, show a written policy, and prove that they violated it, then that is good enough to combat an unemployment claim. So again, the documentation becomes really important there. I have won many an unemployment claim just by sending in that documentation. Didn't even have to go through a weightier process. It was not time consuming at all for me to fight that claim. And so that is where I really encourage you, if you've got a good policy in your handbook and and the documentation doesn't have to be in any specific way. I've sent instant message chat conversations, emails, time cards, submitted all sorts of those sorts of things as evidence of corrective action taken, and that has been sufficient. So it doesn't have to be that you're using some specific form every time to document this stuff. Just make sure that those conversations are in writing or recapped in writing. And then the final common myth is exit interviews don't provide any legal protection. They're just a way for people to complain. A lot of people don't like to do exit interviews because they think that it's just an open door for people to slam you. And it's just really not true. They can be used as evidence that you are committed to two-way feedback. They serve as a snapshot of the employee's story at that moment. And so if they then go get advice from someone to change that story, it makes them less credible, right? If they were to file a claim. So it's great to have them put in writing what they think happened on their way out. Because that happens a lot, where then they'll go consult someone and the story starts to evolve and change, right, based on what becomes more advantageous to them. So asking them to complete an exit interview is a great way to get them to put in writing those details at that time. And then again, so before deciding to terminate, some things we want to ask ourselves around this employee are, is this going to be a surprise to them? Did I do a good job of talking to them about these issues or this issue? assuming that it's not some egregious thing that it would be reasonable to fire from one instance that we haven't talked about before. But is this going to be a surprise to them? And then again, are there any relevant protected class concerns? So simply everybody is in at least 4 protected classes. So simply being in a protected class is not a risk. It's really, is there something about them that makes them unique in the makeup of the rest of your team? And is that something that they could argue is influencing your decision? So it's sort of that 2-pronged thing that you want to look at. And then how have I handled similar situations in the past, especially if it's in the recent past, right? If I just had someone do similar behavior and maybe they're a top performer, so I let it go, and now I have this person that I maybe don't value as much and I'm going to fire them for this similar reason, then that can look bad and that can create a path for a claim there. So thinking about how you've handled similar situations is an important piece of that risk assessment. And then again, before deciding to terminate, reviewing my handbook. So what do I have in at-will policy? It is the default status in all states except Montana. But if I don't have that disclaimer in my handbook, it gives the opportunity for the employee to argue that I'm not an at-will employer and makes the terminations a little bit trickier. So part of making sure I've got my ducks in a row is, do I have that policy in my handbook? What does my progressive discipline policy look like? Oftentimes we've seen people have overly rigid policies that really lock them into a 5-step or however many step process. And if that's the type of language that I've used, did I actually follow that process? Hopefully what you've got instead is a progressive discipline policy that specifically says, depending on the circumstances of this issue, I may escalate or I may skip steps. And so if you've got that type of policy, then you should be good to go. And you don't have to worry about, did I follow the process exactly as it's written? And then a misstep that we see oftentimes in handbooks is a policy requiring just cause. So if you've got that sort of policy, then it means that you as the employer need to be able to prove that the employee did something that is fireable. And if you've got that sort of policy in your handbook, I'd encourage you to reach out to CEDR and we'll help you fix that, because that would not be advantageous to you. Some other considerations ahead of making that decision are, am I going to offer this person severance? And so that would be, where you've got an agreement with them that outlines their legal responsibilities and yours and how much you're going to pay them for this termination, or pay in lieu of notice. And pay in lieu of notice would be, I'm not giving you a 2-week notice of your termination. You're terminated today, but I'm going to pay you 2 weeks as a courtesy. And neither of these things is legally required in almost all circumstances, but it's something you would want to decide upfront so that when you deliver this news to this person, you can tell them if you're offering these things or not. So once you've made the decision, hopefully you've got a termination checklist. If you don't, I would encourage you, from this presentation and other resources, to draft one. Terminating people is an emotional endeavor, right? Both on you and the person. It's really helpful to be able to defer to a checklist to make sure that you're hitting all those important points. You've got everything in order, so that once you go into this emotional situation, you haven't forgotten something or are unprepared and are caught off guard with the employee. And then, so preparing for that meeting, if you don't have experience of this, I do encourage you to role play. Practicing saying the words out loud can greatly reduce your stress once you're in the situation. So if you've got a spouse or even a child, if there's somebody in your office who you trust having this information up front, role play with them, whoever it may be, even if it's just saying the words out loud on your way home. It can be a tough thing, especially if it's your first time. So I do encourage that. Be prepared for this person to cry, get mad, any sort of emotion. Have a box ready for them to take their stuff. The last thing you want is to be scrambling around if they've got a bunch of things that they need to take and they can't carry it all. And so have something ready to help them out. Arrange for timely software access shut off. So if you've got someone in the office who's handling that for you, give them the heads up, even if it's 5 minutes before you're headed into the meeting, if you can't trust them to keep it quiet for longer, and have them, help you make sure that you're shutting down their access to your company information. And then make sure you have that final check ready, a separation letter, any other paperwork that's necessary. Not in all states do you need to have the final check at that meeting. So make sure that you're aware of the laws in your state. But in California, you do have to give them a check on their final day. And so, let's say you find yourself in a situation where you discovered somebody did something really egregious, and you've got to let them go today. But you can't get them a check ready because your payroll company or whatever circumstance does not allow you to actually have check in hand right now. You can just make their final day tomorrow, right? So I'm going to pay them still for tomorrow. I will deliver their check to them tomorrow. So there are ways around that, but please be aware that in California, you do have to give them a check on their last day. And then the termination meeting. So the timing of the meeting is an important consideration. Typically, once I've made the decision to fire somebody, I want to act sooner than later. I don't want to hold that meeting at the very end of the day, right? I don't want that person working around me, the uncomfortable tension all day. So I'm going to do it probably early in the morning. The timing during the week is sort of subjective as to what is better. Some people say don't fire people on a Friday because they don't have access to certain resources on the weekends. But some people say a Friday is better, right? Because then they wouldn't go to work the next day anyways in certain cases. So but definitely in the morning is preferable to waiting until the end of the day, unless something happened in the middle of the day that made you need to fire them immediately, right? Then I wouldn't wait till the next morning to do it. I would just do it now. Of course, meet privately. You're not going to do this in front of your whole team, right? But you do want a witness, ideally. And then make sure that you're collecting any company equipment that they might have on them. Certainly if they've got keys or something, get that before they walk out the door. Make sure that that final paycheck includes, if you're doing that pay in lieu of notice, if they have earned a bonus that hasn't been paid out yet, any vacation time payout that you may or may not owe them, consider whether or not you should be taking benefit premiums, depending on the timing of that check out of it. Do not hold the final paycheck for any reason. That is a easy lawsuit for that employee, okay? And then if they want to leave, just let them leave. Don't, sometimes what happens is we feel like the conversation's not over, or there's more details we need to give them. Maybe we're legally required to give them some more details. We can email them that. If somebody is in an emotional state and is trying to get out, just let them go. And then it's always ideal to walk them out of the building. Make sure you see them leave. So it doesn't mean you have to stand next to them and escort them, but you can be a few paces behind them and just make sure that they're safely out of the building and that they're not stopping and talking to your remaining employees or saying things to patients or anything like that. So make sure you've got eyes on them and see them exit the building. Be ready to answer their questions, right? So they may ask you, do I work the rest of the day or am I leaving now? When can I collect my things? The ideal answer is, I've got a box for you right here. Let's go get your stuff. If it's in a visible area, maybe the answer is, I'll ship it to you, or you can come back, you know, at the end of the day and collect it or something like that. They may ask about their coworkers' awareness, what their patients are going to be told, what you're going to do with the appointments they already have scheduled, that sort of thing. And you can just let them know that you have thought through all those details and you will handle all of those arrangements. Whether or not they get unemployment is entirely up to the state unemployment. And so you can defer them to them for that. And then if they're asking about, you know, what you're going to tell someone who calls for a reference, you can assure them that you will only confirm the details of the length of their employment, what their position was, that sort of factual information. And then, you know, the thing that I want you to keep in mind here is that this is likely going to be a very tough thing on somebody for them to hear, even if in the long run, it ends up being a good thing for them, right? Because if they're struggling at your place of work, that's not a good feeling for them either. As much as it feels bad for you and is problematic for you, they likely have some awareness and emotions around that themselves. And oftentimes letting them go is a kindness, but they don't feel that until later. And so in the moment, this is a very tough thing. And one of the things that I say to mentor other HR professionals is, if you get to the point where you enjoy firing someone, you shouldn't be in a position to fire someone anymore. And so what I mean by that is, oftentimes it's a relief for us, right? Because they're causing us problems, and that's okay. But if we're actually taking joy in firing someone, then maybe this isn't what we should be doing anymore. So have compassion and just think, you know, do this with kindness as much as you can, so that they can go move on with their lives and we can move on with getting somebody who's going to do great work for us. Some sort of specific phrases or language that you can use to help prepare yourself if you find yourself in this situation. You know, in that meeting, get right to the point. We don't need to start with small talk or have a leading conversation. Be very direct and very clear. So we're terminating your employment effective immediately is the language that I use and recommend. There's no gray area there for them to not understand what it is that I'm telling them right now. We do encourage you to give a brief explanation. I would not go into details and rehash it, because if you've done your job, they know exactly why they're being fired, even if they're pretending not to in the moment, because we've had conversations about this before. But maybe I'm going to recap and I'm going to say something like, you know, based on the conversations we've been having over the last few months, it's clear that you are not going to perform at the level we need you to, or it's clear that you're not meeting our expectations in these areas, something like that. Keep your tone professional. Do not apologize. You don't have anything to apologize for. If you've been doing your job, you've been coaching them, you've been talking to them, this is now just a business decision and it's okay. Don't engage in an argument. I've had many times where I've had to use this phrase of, this discussion's no longer productive, so I'm going to end this meeting now. I'm not going to keep answering their questions. I'm not going to engage in them saying, well, that's not true, you didn't tell me this or this and that. So that is an effective way to say, we're not talking about this anymore. I'm not going to argue with you. If they raise their voice, lower yours. That can be an effective technique to get them to calm down and listen to you instead of trying to amp up the feelings. You know, if they're trying to engage in that argument and you employ this phrasing, I would stand up at that time as a cue that the meeting is over and we're going to move on now. If they try to engage in an argument, you can also reiterate the decision is final. And now we're going to move on to here are some logistics that you need to know. Here's when your benefits end. Here's a letter explaining all of this to you. And then if possible, try to end the meeting on a positive note. Thank them for their contributions to your practice. A little bit more information on exit interviews here. We recommend that you ask every departing employee to complete one. That is a controversial opinion. I will admit many people think that it's cruel to ask somebody that you just fired to do an exit interview. However, I'm going to give you an example. If you fired somebody because they were not able to accept constructive guidance or acknowledge corrective actions and that sort of thing, and they complete this exit interview and it comes back with pages of ranting, that is going to support the reason that you fired them. And so oftentimes we find that even for people who left involuntarily, that when they do complete an exit interview, it inadvertently supports the reason why we let them go. And so that is advantageous to us. So we do recommend asking every employee to complete an exit interview. You probably won't get them from the vast majority, but the times that you do, it can be valuable either in a protective way, or it can give you information that you didn't know. And in that case, you do want to take any accusations seriously and investigate those issues and document that you did so in response to the exit interview. You don't have to communicate with the former employee, but you want to keep that documentation for your own records. We talked a little bit about unemployment, but again, a common issue that we see at CEDR is people wanting support with defending themselves against unemployment claims when they were justified in firing someone. And really the best defenses that we see that are successful is having a written policy, being able to prove that the employee was aware of the policy. And the best way to do that is that acknowledgement on their first day, signing an acknowledgement of receipt of that handbook with the policy in it. And then documentation that demonstrates their violations and your efforts to correct the behavior. So that goes back to it doesn't have to be formal all the time. It could be chats with them, emails, actual corrective actions, your notes from your verbal conversations. All of that can support you if you are in a situation where you're fighting an unemployment claim. Then, of course, once the decision's been made, that information's been delivered, you are going to have to let your team know. So be ready for their questions. Make sure that you're answering carefully. You will have people who are in their corner in that conversation. And so, you know, anything you say should be through the lens of it might get back to that person. You should have a plan in place for what you're going to do with their workload, and be ready to tell your team what that plan is. And of course, be ready for there to be posts on social media conversations between current employees and that ex-employee, that sort of thing. And then remember that not only how you treat them, but how you communicate to your team, whether or not you have a plan in place, that is all noticed by your remaining employees. And so it's important to think those things through and have that be part of that termination checklist so that you're ready for it. To recap the do's and don'ts and wrap up the webinar today, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have that documentation. definitely take action quickly once a decision's been made. The last thing that you want is to plan to fire somebody in 3 days because you heard that Fridays is better than Tuesday, and then that person gets hurt at work and you've got a workers' comp claim now that you're dealing with when that person shouldn't have even been there. And then again, be direct, but also have compassion. And the don't make a heat of the moment, emotional, rash decision. It's always best to take a step back and make sure that you've got your documentation and all of your ducks in a row before you decide to fire somebody. Make sure you're planning for that impact to the rest of the team, and don't be unprepared. So don't walk into a termination meeting without your letter, without your final check or a plan for the final check, without knowing the details on when their benefits end, that sort of thing. Okay, so we've got this QR code here if you want more information about CEDR. You're welcome to visit our website. We've got a ton of resources on hiring, firing, and everything in between. We've got a great newsletter that'll give you some good information about managing employees and the legal compliance and the practical application of that in a dental practice. All right, do we have any questions?
Great. Let's see. I don't have any questions on the chat. Does anybody have any questions? You can unmute yourself and ask away. Otherwise, I have a few questions. Okay, I'll ask. Best way to document, you said anything can be evidence, like text, emails, screenshots. Just make sure it's in one place, maybe to try to get it organized.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you've got something that's relevant to an ongoing situation and it's a text or I would just forward that so that you've got it all in one place so you're not scrambling for it if you find yourself in need of it. And so you don't accidentally lose some of it either and save it in that employee file.
Gotcha. And the final check. So let's say, I know you should always let go somebody in person. Let's say if that's not possible, you have to send a check. Is that like, how do you do that? Do you have to make sure like maybe like postmark is that day of when you announce it, or?
Yeah, so in California, it has to be check in hand.
Oh,
So if you can't meet with them in person on that last day, then you're going to employ that tactic of if I can overnight it, then tomorrow is your final day. So I'm going to pay you for tomorrow, and you're going to get your final check tomorrow, and your on paper last day is tomorrow. Or if you're going to do 2-day like FedEx or something like that. So just make sure that the day you're physically getting them the check, you're paying them through that day, and that is their last day. So for benefits purposes and all that sort of thing, their last day is the day they're actually getting the check, even if they're not in your office working.
gotcha. Is there a I know everybody's scared of pregnant employees. Is there a specific thing you should watch out for, like other than, best practice that you explain when you have to let go of employee that's pregnant?
So the biggest thing is really going to be your documentation, because if you can prove that the reason that you fired them was because of these performance issues and had nothing to do with her being pregnant, then her being pregnant is not a factor, right? So the thing where it becomes problematic is maybe I've had this employee who's been late all the time and I haven't done anything about it. And whether or not I had planned to start tomorrow or not, if I find out tomorrow she's pregnant too, then that's where it starts complicating things for me. So, that is certainly a risk factor. I'm not going to sugarcoat it and say that that doesn't add complications. But if you're just always making a habit of documenting along the way, and then those surprises come up, they really become a tiny risk factor instead of a big risk factor.
So documentation is the key. Is there is arbitration agreement like effective? I think I heard like different stories.
It really is gonna depend on your state. But certainly if it's an allowable thing in your state, though they can absolutely be binding. And so for people who don't know, an arbitration agreement is just an agreement to go through a different process rather than just outright suing you as the employer, if something comes up. And so how they can be effective is it can save you a lot of money, because you've got to go through this different mediation process that is cheaper, and allows you to not go through the bigger court system and reach a settlement and all that sort of stuff and the lawyer fees that go along with that. So it's really going to depend on your state, though, whether or not it's going to be effective.
In case of California.
I don't actually know offhand about California specifically. I know in Arizona they're effective, but I don't know about California. I know the employees have so many more rights. I'm inclined to say it's not, but I'm not certain.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I have one made by a HR specialist,
Mhm.
but it's like such a thick legal document. And I feel like you have to make sure they understand when they get it and sign, right? So that means
Mhm.
I have to have that special person come in and actually explain what they're signing. That seems like, you know,
Yeah, ours is like 2 pages, so
oh,
yours may be more complicated, and then that does hamper your ability to enforce it because the employee can argue that they were under duress to sign it in order to work for you, and they can't be expected to understand it. So, you may have an opportunity to simplify it, so that it is more binding for you.
oh, okay. So it doesn't have to be 25 pages. It could be 2 pages.
Yeah,
I see. And how often should you update the employee manual?
great question. The simplest answer is at least once a year. But the real answer is anytime a law changes that requires you to. And so what I mean by that is sometimes there are law changes like minimum wage, for example. You can have a policy that just says we pay at least minimum wage, right? And then it's good in perpetuity as minimum wage changes. However, if a sick leave law changes or is enacted in your state, that will require you to either modify or create a policy that adheres to the sick leave laws. So it sort of depends on which law is changing. And then the other component is, of course, if you are changing something voluntarily. So maybe I'm changing my core values and I have my core values in my handbook. Maybe I'm changing, the holidays that I offer or something like that. So it can sort of depend on what's going on in your office as well.
Is there a specific time when the laws change every year? It just kind of depends. And how do you know if the laws are changing?
Well, you can subscribe to your state Department of Labor, but they're all called something different. Some of them are like the Industrial Commission, or the Department of Workforce Development. So you can subscribe to whatever that is in your state, and sort of wade through that process on your own. At CEDR, we have an entire compliance department that tracks laws across the country. So it's an endeavor for sure to be on top of those things in terms of how for the win. Most often those laws go into effect either the start of a calendar year, so sometime in a January, and then we also see a lot this time of year into the summer. I don't know why they choose that timing, but that seems to be when there's an influx beginning in January, and then sort of April through June, July timeframe.
And how do you approach managing underperforming employees?
With a lot of transparent, direct conversation, setting very clear and specific expectations or goals, and then making sure that you're following up and telling them how they're doing in that progress. So, you know, the easiest example is just somebody who's late all the time. If I keep letting it go, it's going to keep happening. But if I, you know, every time they're late, if I say, hey, you were late again, here's the impact that it had. I need you to be on time, you know, tomorrow and going forward. And then the next time I've got to say, hey, you were late again. Now this is turning into a more formal conversation. I'm going to put this in writing. We're going to both agree that you're going to be on time now. And then the next time, you know, it's a more serious conversation. And, you know, for something like being late, you may have 3 or 4 of those conversations before you're letting them go, but it's important that there's some sort of follow-up afterwards. And so it can be really difficult to celebrate those wins sometimes, but if after the 3rd time I talk to them and they go a week without being late, when before they were at least once a week late, I need to say, hey, you were not late at all last week. So you're on the right track, and I really appreciate your effort to correct this behavior. And that can be hard because being on time is like the bare minimum, right?
Right.
But if we've had that conversation and we see them change, we've got to acknowledge it.
Okay. So some positive feedback and manage that way. I see.
Yeah.
When in the case of, I think I briefly asked you earlier, like, 'cause there's a lot of AIs and, you know, outsourcing employees coming out. Like, if I need to handle where I no longer lead this person, they are doing a great job, but I just don't need them, you know, for my business purpose. Like, how do you let them go? Because it's feels like a different conversation than when they're actually doing something wrong.
It's definitely a different conversation. And I think it's okay to be transparent and say, you know, this is where the business is heading. Um, it is not a problem with your performance. It is just a decision that we need to make because it's fiscally responsible for us. I'm willing to give you a good reference if that's the truth. You know, if a position opens up in the future, I'd love to work with you again. You know, you can say all of those types of things to them.
Gotcha. Okay. I think that's all I got for questions. Does anybody else have any other questions? There's so much anxiety around people management and just unknowns about law. So just yeah, and you know, once you get through it, like you have so much questions, like, but until you get
Yes.
through it, like sometimes you don't know what to expect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really one of the hardest parts of, you know, employing people, having a small business, especially when you're in a position where you went into dentistry to not to have to deal with these sorts of things. And so, you know, I know it's an unpleasant thing, but the more you can prepare yourself, the easier this stuff becomes and the less scary it can be.
Yeah, and I think part of being a business owner is just getting through these problems, knowing
Mm-hmm.
how to handle those situations, and the longer you do it, I think it gets better. So
Absolutely.
it's really daunting when you first fire somebody, but next time it's a little bit better. Hopefully you don't have to do
Mhm.
too often, but you do have to do it sometimes.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think your feedback was like very helpful. I feel like I'm a little bit more prepared to fire somebody if I have to do it. I have some verbiage, so thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
Right, Cece, thank you so much for all your knowledge today. Next webinar that we have will be about dental marketing. It's going to be in mid-May, so stay tuned for that. And then if you have any questions about HR, especially dentist related, CEDR is really good. I met Cece a few times, and I love them. So make sure you contact them if you have any questions.